Welcome back.
Welcome back to Hear Us Out. I'm Renee.
I'm Gary.
Thank you so much for finding us and to hearing what it is that we have to say. And for all the new listeners who are here for the first time, thank you. And make sure to hit the subscription so that you can continue to hear us out.
Yes, thank you. And on this episode, we will be reading the final chapter
Yes.
of Plato's Republic, Book 10.
Book 10.
Final episode
Yep.
on Plato
Yes.
and his Republic.
Let it end.
Yeah. And we've been kind of this whole story, this whole little tale has been about Socrates trying to prove that justice is more profitable than injustice, and it's better to live a just life, to be a just person. And a lot of the beginning chapters I think 1 through 3, were about Plato arguing against different counter points to his. But the main point is that it is more profitable. The main point that I think it was Adamantus who brought this one up, that it is more profitable to appear just than to actually be just. Right. So Socrates, he ends up, because he equates the city to the soul of man. He ends up going through this whole
series
of ideas, trying to create the perfect city. Because inside of the perfect city, there will be a better analysis, or you can say an easier analysis of justice, of the things that exactly what justice is, and why is it that it's more better, not more better, just better.
It's better, right?
That it is better than injustice. So he ends up creating his city. And throughout all the different chapters, we've discussed exactly what that city is. And really, what his city is an aristocracy, or what he calls the rule of the best. He wants to make sure that all of the best people are in, their optimal positions to ensure the overall health of his society. He has said many a times that he is not prioritizing that his city isn't about the happiness of one particular group. That every group is sacrificing a bit of their own happiness or a bit of their own freedom for the overall health of the society as a whole. And so he talks about how he needs his leaders, his guardians, as he calls them. What would you call them? Kings?
Yeah.
His kings, the administrators, and the warriors to be of the highest caliber. They need to be the best that they can possibly be. They need to not only be learned in the arts of war, but also in the art of philosophy, and being able to analyze and critically understand what reality is and how it relates to them and everyone else. Because as a philosopher and as a king, that is your job. Your ultimate purpose is to give purpose and to give the ultimate impetus to your society. And as your guardians, you're the ones at the head of the line. So you're the ones who must be the very best. You must be the very best. And so he talks about all the different ways he would want to ensure that, all the different ways he tries to perfect society. And he talks about how he wants to make sure that the children are educated properly, because to him you can't be good all of a sudden. You can't just become good. You can't just become smart. These are things that are curated throughout a person's life. So from the very beginning, they must be exposed to the right ideas. They must be taught the right way. They must be brought up in the right atmosphere for themselves, because the things that make a good leader, the bravery, intelligence, ambition, those things are evident from the very beginning. And if you are able to see those things at the very beginning and hone them and curate them, then you can lift that person up to the upper strata of society and make sure that they are best placed to ensure the health of society as a whole. And for those people who do not have those qualities, right, but possess the qualities that make them good at other things, they must also be curated to make sure that they are the very best in whatever field that they are in, that they are preordained to be in. And so he goes through how they need to be educated, the things they need to listen to, how they ought to dress. He talks about how there is no such thing as private property in his city. It's all owned by the state, and nobody owns anything, not even the leaders. And how the leaders need to have everything that they need uh, to be able to properly lead, but not a surplus of it, not an abundance of it, because he goes out of his way to point out how they're not doing this for profit. They're not doing this for their own personal gain. It's about the city as a whole. And so he talks about no private property, how children are going to be raised by the city,
by the city
by
state.
the state. Yeah. Excuse the siren.
Welcome to the city. Welcome to the city. Welcome to the city.
Okay. All right. And he talks about how the children, you just hear it all the time. Like, it always waits. Yes. It always waits for us. But he talks about how the children are property of the state, and their education, their rearing up, their growth is oversaw by the state itself. And that he talks about how you want to separate the children, and how you're going to want to make sure that the best of the best, your best and brightest, are in one position, and those who are not showing the right qualities are somewhere else. Right. And he talks about all of these things. He talks about how they're evident in the soul, and that it is truly, like, it is of the utmost importance that your kings and that your warriors have the right education, that they must be philosophers, right? Because it is only then will they not only know how to do their job, but also will they understand the importance of their job and the true responsibility that they have, and how to best be able to do it. And after he establishes his city, and he establishes all the things that his city is going to do, he then goes on to talk about the other cities, different types of governments,
like the constitutions, right?
The different types of forms of constitutions, and how they end up failing the people, and why they fail the people. And he ultimately comes to this point in chapter 10, where practically all his points are made. Right. He said everything that he wanted to say. He's done everything he wanted to do. And here in chapter 10, he begins by talking about the problem with
the artist
poetry.
Yeah, poets. Right.
He literally he talks about how poets are imitators, and why imitation is wrong. Mainly, this touches on his ideas of the metaphysics, the metaphysical. He says, let me see. Then shall we go on and begin our inquiry following our usual method. I think we have usually assumed a general form or idea, one idea in each class of many particulars to which we give the same name. You understand, don't you? I do. He's talking to Glaucon. Now, taking a class of many particulars, you please. For instance, if you like, there are many beds and tables, by all means. These have ideas, I suppose, underlying them. Two, in fact. One of the bed, one of the table. Yes. Well, we usually say that the craftsman is making either of these articles of furniture, keeps his eye upon the idea, and so makes the beds or tables, which you use accordingly, and so with other things. For I suppose no craftsman makes the idea itself. How could he? He could not. Now, please consider how you define this craftsman. What one? The one who makes everything that separate handicraftsmen make. What a wonderful, clever man you speak of. Wait a minute. You would say that more than ever directly. This same handicraftsman can make not only furniture, but he makes all that grows in the earth and fashions all living creatures, all these including himself. And besides earth and heaven and gods and all that is in heaven above and in Hades under the earth, he fashions all. There's a marvel, said he, a real professor of knowledge. Don't you believe me? Said I. Just inform me. Do you deny flatly that there could be such a craftsman? Or do you think that in one way there could be, and in another way there could not be, a maker of all these things? Don't you see that there is a way in which you could make all these things yourself? In what way, if you please? He asked. An easy way. Craftsmen made everywhere and quickly too, most quickly I think, if you pick up a mirror and carry it about everywhere, you will then quickly make a sun and all there is in the heavens, quickly in earth, quickly yourself and other animals and furniture and plants and everything else I mentioned. So what Plato, just as a brief pause here, what Plato is talking about is this his grand idea of the metaphysical and how it relates to the physical. He says that the craftsman doesn't create the idea of a bed. Something else created that. What a craftsman is doing is you could say replicating, that idea in the physical, trying to create a physical representation of a metaphysical idea. There's a metaphysical, perfect platonic bed that is the ideal bed. When the craftsman is building a bed, he is building a physical representation of that ideal thing, right? But what he's saying, when he goes on to say is that because the craftsman did not create the idea, but the craftsman is forming reality, right? Is creating reality. But do you think that there is a craftsman who goes beyond, just creating the bed, but ends up creating, like I said, reality itself, the earth and the heavens and all the things? And then he says, yes. Glaucon answers yes. And then Plato says, well, is there a way that you can do these things? And then Glaucon is suspicious, like, maybe, I don't know. Right. I don't really think so. And Plato says, so, but what if you have a mirror? You have a mirror. And since a craftsman is merely what you could say replicating and reflecting this ideal, if you had a mirror and you took it up and you reflected the sun, then in a way you would have created the sun. You could create yourself if you point the mirror at yourself. Anything you point your mirror at, you end up creating in that mirror because you point the mirror at it. Right? So, and then God, well, yeah, you're right. You're right in a sense. But that goes to serve his overall point about artists as a whole. Right? Yeah. And so it says, splendid. Just what is needed to help our argument. The painter is one of these craftsmen, isn't he? Why, yes. But you will say, I think, that there is no truth in what he makes. Yet, in a way at least, even the painter makes a bed, doesn't he? Yes. And that is an appearance too. And what of the maker of beds? Surely you said just now that he does not make the idea, which we say is the bedhood of a bed, but only some particular bed. Yes, I did. And if he does not make the bedhood, he would not be making real being, but only something resembling real being, but not itself real. But if anyone should say the cabinet maker's work or any other handicraftsman's work really exists in the full and perfect sense, he simply would not be telling the truth. So once again, he's touching on this idea of the metaphysical. The ideal is the actual reality. right? Whereas the craftsman, what he is creating is a replica, a reflection, of that reality. But the painter is even worse, because they are creating a reflection of a reflection, a replica of a replica. So his overall point here is that you can't really learn anything from an artist, especially from a poet. Because just how a painter, when he paints a bed, is creating a replica of a replica, when a poet is creating sonnets and lyrics about pain and grief and war and all these things, what he's creating is a replica of a replica, and even, like I said, even less true than the original replica in and of itself. So these things are, in Plato's eyes, 3 steps away from truth. They are as far away from truth as one can possibly be. So he takes umbrage with the lessons that people think that they can learn from artists, because artists merely create replicas of replicas. There is no actual truth in these things. So when this is kind of an idea he touches on early on in the Republic, but when a person in one of these epic poems, has to faces grief, and they pound their chest, they extol their pains and talk about all the pain they're in, the grief that they're in, to Plato, that is unmanly. They're doing something that has no basis in truth. That's not, as far as Plato's, that's not how you're supposed to react when you're in pain. You're supposed to, swallow it deep and continue to go about your work, right? Because as he's talking about early on, that's the ultimate purpose of humanity. Is to do their job. And so a farmer to be a farmer, and a craftsman to be a craftsman.
And if he can't do that, then
he even goes, because early on he talks about if someone is sick and they can't do their work, right? And the doctor says that they need to, they need to take an inordinate amount of time to recover. Right, months perhaps, years perhaps, to recover from an injury or from a particular sickness, that they should ignore the doctor and continue to go about their work. And if they get better, then it shows that that was their purpose. And if they die, then at least they died doing their work. This is the point he touched on earlier. And you see it reflected here, that poets when they talk about human emotions and grief and anger and happiness and all these things, they talk about it to such an extent that it takes people away from their responsibilities and their work. There's no truth in that. And how could there be? They're imitating.
That's right.
They're imitating an imitation.
That's right.
They're the ultimate imitators. There is no truth in that. He goes out of his way to point out the fallacy of Homer and Hesiod and all the great epic poets that he grew up, learning about, and everybody in ancient times grew up learning about and hearing about. And there is no truth in what they are doing. So Plato seems to not understand what art is.
Yeah, we talked about that extensively.
This is the point that we've touched on.
We were like, okay, we're done with this.
This is the point we've touched on many a times, because, like, even in Ion, when Plato seems to have a problem with poets, seems to have a problem with artists, seems to have a problem with the idea that people think artists know things. To him, it's impossible for them to know.
That's blasphemous.
It's impossible for them to know. They get all their knowledge through divine dispensation and right opinion. They don't actually know anything. So to learn from them, and not from philosophers, people who actually do, as far as Plato's concerned, actually do know things.
That's problematic.
Through reasoning, is wrong. Artists don't know anything. He even goes out even further to point that when Plato writes his poems about war, right? But was Plato ever a general? Was Plato ever
Homer.
listened to? Not
Yeah.
Plato, yeah,
Yeah, Homer.
Homer. Was Homer ever a general? Was
Right.
Homer ever listened to?
Mm-hmm.
Was any of his advice ever taken? Why was
Right.
he not a great general in his day?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Why
And
was he
he
not a
writes
great?
about this so
He
much
talks
more.
about
Right.
he
Right.
talks about all the process that people need to undergo to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And, as talks about the things that doctors did. Plato wasn't a doctor.
Right.
Was his advice ever taken?
Mm-hmm.
Advice, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
or was his standard ever followed by any doctor?
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't a doctor. He
Right.
wasn't a general. Nobody really ever listened to him in
Mm-hmm.
these circles. So why is it that people are thinking that they can take lessons
Mm-hmm.
from this man, from his works,
Right.
when he doesn't actually
No.
know
Right.
about the things he's, you know, poetizing
Yeah.
about?
Right.
And I say that Plato does not understand art.
No.
He
In a
doesn't he
nutshell.
doesn't understand art.
Right. He doesn't understand. It's an expression. He doesn't. For him, things are very narrow here.
Very lateral.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's right, wrong, rule, ruled. You
Mm-hmm.
know, warrior, non-fighter, whatever. Everything is pretty much that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so to try to extrapolate knowledge and lessons from poets, and I just put that under the umbrella of any artist,
Yeah.
a writer or whatever, to try to learn from them when they don't know is for him a fallacy. It's it leads you down a path of not being able to make sound decisions, I guess.
These are his exact words on the topic.
Uh-huh.
Then imitative art is a long way from truth. And as it seems, that is why it reproduces everything, because it touches only a little part of each, and even that an image. For example, the painter, as we said, will paint us a cobbler, or a carpenter, or any other craftsman, although he understands nothing of any of these arts. But all the same, if he is a good painter, he could deceive children and fools if he showed them his painting of a carpenter from a distance, and he could make them think it was a real carpenter. Of course it could. But we got a thing to remember in such cases, my friend, if anyone should announce to us that he had met with a man who knows all the arts and crafts as well as each particular man knows them, knows everything about them better than all the world, we ought to retort to such a man that he must be a simple soul, and he seems to have met a magician and an imitator who tricked him into believing he was all wise, when the fact is he is at fault himself, because he himself cannot tell the difference between knowledge and ignorance, or see what imitation is.
Mm-hmm.
So, like we said, he takes umbrage with
Mm-hmm.
the idea that people, and I read this, and it's like I don't even like. You can tell that this is political.
Yes, right.
That he's talking about a person that doesn't exist, as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's a person, even during his time, right, that met someone and that they think that this person knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think what happened, what he sees happening, is that people are taking moral lessons
Mm-hmm.
from poets,
Mm-hmm.
and they are taking moral lessons from artists, right? When, as far as Plato's concerned, these people don't know anything with it. They don't know anything about the things that they're representing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Why are people learning from them when they should be learning from philosophers? So this supposed person he's talking about doesn't even really exist,
Mm-hmm.
because Plato, in and of himself, doesn't know why people are feeling like they've learned something from art.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't understand,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what? It made you a better craftsman? It made you a better cobbler? What do you mean it taught you something?
Mm-hmm.
That person doesn't know anything about cobbling, doesn't know anything about being a craftsman. So how what did you learn?
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn? And like we said, they're not artists aren't imitators.
Right.
To say that they're imitating reality is um, a you could say at best it's a simplification.
Definitely.
At worst, it's a complete misunderstanding of what they're doing. Then they're not representing reality in so much that they're expressing a feeling.
That's right.
Through the lens of reality. Nobody sees a portrait.
Right.
Nobody sees like the Mona Lisa and think that that's supposed to be in, a picture of an actual woman, and it's supposed to accurately represent reality. Portraits may contain human, effects, human faces, human chairs and stuff.
Right.
But they're not. But they're not representing an actual depiction of reality. It's an expression of a feeling.
Right.
It's an expression. It's the same thing in plays and these epic poems.
Right.
No, the generals, in Plato's, not in Plato's, in Homer's Iliad, their battle plans may not actually work. But they're not. But that's not the point.
Right.
It's a play.
Right. It's a dramatization.
It's a dramatization. Right. No, maybe a person doesn't pound their chest and go on epic monologues about their pain in real life. But it's a play.
Right.
So
no one thinks that Odysseus was, look like we say having these long montages and monologues.
Yeah, like when Achilles talks about the pain he suffered when what's his name? Patroclus dies. Right. And he's just so upset that his lover and his friend is dead. Right. And then he goes to this long spiel. And he's so greatly affected. Right. And people are moved by this. Right. And Plato's sitting like, what? Why? That's not how you're supposed to react. It's a play.
It's a play, dog.
Right. He's talking about a feeling.
Right.
Who are you to say how someone is supposed to react to begin with? This is one of the
that too. Right.
One of those big things. Like, that's not how you're supposed to react. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Yes. People can react any way that they want to.
Right.
Number one, but I guess it's only proper to just, it's manlier to just take it in stride and keep going about your work, whatever stupid.
Right.
It's like, he has a fundamental misunderstanding of how people relate to art.
Or just the range of people have feelings. They have emotions. And so much of what Plato has expressed throughout, these 10 books is the lack of it, or that if people have it, that they shouldn't because it clouds their judgment, to make quote unquote sound decisions. And I remember, talking about, just that whole sentiment of, there is this thought that everything is planned, particularly, that everything is planned, and that scholarship, particularly by Western writers or whatever, that that there isn't any emotion, and so because it lacks that makes it the scholarship or premier type of writing, and I'm like, are you all here on planet Earth? Like, you have to understand that so much of what we are dealing with is based on how a people feel about another group. That's what we're dealing with. And so even in Plato's time, for him to act as if he's not dealing with how he feels about another group is...
You tried to marry this objective analysis.
Yes. Is
of education and learning.
Right. It's crap to me.
Like, he can't understand how a person can be moved and have moral lessons about life through art.
And like I said, just the fact of like how he expresses the different type of constitutions and the men that are produced and all of those type of things. That's the reason why he thinks that the aristocrat, all right, is the best of the best. That's based on how he feels. Even though he may not see it that way, all of your entire expressions is all based on what you feel. It's not
your sense of truth is more important than what that actual truth is, because that's what guides you to what you would believe that truth is.
Right. So I'm not gonna say that he's a walking hypocrite, but I'm like, you're really not. You're really not taking a step back to really fully understand what it is that you're doing in your play and how the things that you're expressing is just that.
An expression.
It's an expression.
So Plato, like I said, is trying to marry his opinions with some objective reality.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
Right.
You know, and it's like there's a fundamental failing here. It's because the way I see it, if people are being moved by art and taking lessons from art, and you don't understand, then it's not a failure of art.
Right.
It's your failure. It's your failure of understanding.
Right. Correct.
So the fact is that there's something about art that people find moving, that people find true.
Right.
Or true enough, right? There's something about these epic poems that carries a truth in that people still read them and are moved about them to this very day.
Right. So this is why this idea of how he talks about the poet and the painter, that they are steps removed, I guess, from the actual
metaphysical.
Right, the metaphysical. I'm like, they are able to express it, in ways of human conditions and thoughts and feelings.
The way that Plato has defined it is that everything is removed from the metaphysical.
Yeah.
A craftsman, when he creates, his table, is merely creating an imitation of the ideal table. And even your ideas of truth is merely a refraction of that actual truth, of the actual idea. So everything is an imitation. But for some reason,
he takes
the artist and the poet is even more of an imitator. Even though I don't think he would define the philosopher as imitating, because the philosopher is able to truly define through reason.
Right.
And like we said, all that, but that's just how you feel.
That's right.
You just feel that your particular field is more right than the other fields. So you go out of your way to question and badger. And he even talks about how there's this whole chapter, not this whole chapter, this paragraph, where he's saying how Homer was never a great general, and Homer, and it's like, well, Plato, were you ever a great general? What law was passed because Plato? What law?
Right.
And this is a Socratic dialogue here. It was like, evidently, society at the time had a greater need for Homer and his artists because, Homer wasn't forced to commit suicide.
Right. We always go back to that.
Nobody ever questioned the rightness of Hesiod.
Right.
In the general public. But there was Socrates was put on trial.
That's right.
And found guilty.
Right. So you need to sip on this cup.
I'm like, so I can understand this angst that Plato would have with society because his teacher was, forced to commit suicide, was killed by said society.
Right.
But if he wants to question the rightness of poems and artists and stuff like that, he seems to be placing this blame on them because people are learning from them instead of from philosophers. It's like all these things, like philosophy is an art to me.
Right.
All these things are meant to be working in conjunction.
Plato
is drawing this, Plato is drawing this line in the sand, and it's us or them, when we're right and they're wrong. It's like, what you're doing here is not the right way of, how could you say, well, you're not healing the divide because you're creating the division in and of itself. But that's not how you teach. Even you said that.
Right.
That you don't even really teach. You're just provoking that inner intuitive thought. So how is that any different from what they're doing?
Right.
It's just like you can just tell that there's a lot of bias happening here. And then he goes on. Once he feels like he's adequately defined why imitation is wrong, right, and why artists are imitators and no one should listen to them. Right. He goes on to talk about the final prophet of justice over injustice. He's established this many a times. Why justice is more profitable. He talks about how when people say injustice is better, they're not really talking about the man, but the monster, the part of man that needs to be reined in and controlled. That's what injustice feeds. And he talks about, in this chapter, he talks about the final accounting of the soul, and how even though injustice may lead to more profit in life, when you die and you go and you travel through the spheres of you travel up the spheres of life, of the afterlife, and you reach I can't say the pearly gates because that's not what he's talking about, right, but he does talk about heavenly rings. So, right. So yeah, there we go. Right. Some his version of the pearly gates. Right. When you reach the hereafter, there will be an accounting of your actions, and at that point, it won't matter about your profit. It is only going to matter about the person you are and what you've done. He first establishes that the soul is immortal. That's right. That it is beyond human sickness and human pains, that the body can be destroyed utterly, but the soul shall remain. That's right. The soul is something else. And he goes to great pains to establish this. Great pains that I will not please don't bother you with. I'm like, oh my God. He goes to great pains to establish this and talk about the immortality of the soul. And that when that soul, when the body dies, right, the soul goes to the soul place, right, into the afterlife. Soul train. And the counting happens, and everything that you have done is accounted for. All that matters is the rightness, not the profit. Right. It's how right you were in life, how rightly you lived. If you hurt people through your injustice, if you were a murderer and a warmonger and a tyrant, right, then it does not matter. That's right. At that point, about the profit that you were able to accrue in life, you will be inexorably pulled toward fire, right, and burning. You will be inexorably pulled toward Hades, toward the underworld, right, where you shall remain forever and always. Amen. Right, he actually said that. So, well, that's that's the not the amen point. He didn't say that. That's the you could say the translation. Yeah. Coming into play. Right. But so Plato goes on. It has his own divine comedy. Yeah. Well, he talks about because the divine comedies were written by Dante Alighieri. You know about the Inferno. Yeah, the Inferno. And I can't remember exactly what the other one. I think it's Paradiso. In Inferno, he talks about hell. I think in Inferno, he talks about hell, and in the other one, I think it's Paradiso. Yeah. I cannot remember exactly. Yeah. But in the other one, he talks about heaven, and he talks about how the soul ascends through heaven. Right. First, he gets taken through all the rings of hell, and he goes through. Then he talks about purgatory. Talks about heaven, and how the soul ascends through all the myriad rings and all the celestial spheres that he likens to the planets and alchemical symbology that you also see in Plato's analogy here. But his overall point is that you get closer and closer and closer to that divine source. Right. When you pass through the rings, you get closer to that divine, actual metaphysical thing. And that if your soul is not right and does not have the right accounting, the right understanding, then it will never be able to make that voyage. Right. It will never be able to do that. And that is the ultimate profit of justice, is that it allows one a closer proximity in this life and the next to the absolute truth. And that's how it
That
ends.
ends. Literally, that's how it
That's
ends.
how it
Right?
ends. With him talking to Glaucon.
Yeah.
He talks about the river. I can read his final thing here. If you know, so with other creatures, the beasts, some pass into men and some into another, the unjust beasts changing into savage ones, the just into gentle ones, and there were all sorts of mixtures. When therefore all the souls had chosen their lives in the order of their lots, they went in turn before Lachesis, and she sent with each the destiny he had chosen, to be his guardian through life and to fulfill all his choice. First, this spirit led the soul to Clotho, passing under her hand the turn of the circling spindle, thus ratifying the fate which he had chosen for his lot. Then, after touching her, the spirit next brought the soul to the spinning of Atropos, never turned back, to make the threads now spun to the never reversed. And from there he went, without casting one look back, below the throne of necessity, and passed through it. Then, after the others had passed through, all traveled into the plain of oblivion, through terrible stifling heat, for the plain is bare of trees and all that grows on the earth. There, he said, they camped, as evening was coming on, beside the river of neglectfulness, whose water no vessel will hold. Everyone was compelled to drink a measure of this water, but those who were saved by prudence drank more than the measure, and whoever drank forgot everything. When they were laid to sleep, and midnight came, there was thunder and earthquake, and then suddenly they were carried upward this way and that to birth, like shooting stars. Was himself prevented from drinking the water, yet how and by what way he came again to his body he knew not, and only he suddenly opened his eyes in the morning and saw himself lying upon the pyre. Mm-hmm. His whole thing is about a person who was thought to be dead, right, being put on their ritual pyre, but coming back to life, right, and recounting this tale of the afterlife. Right? And so, Glaucon, the story was saved and not lost, and it would save us if we would be guided by it, and we shall safely cross the river of oblivion. We shall not stain the soul, but if we will follow my advice, believing the soul immortal and able to undergo all evil things and all good things, we will hold ever to the upward road, and we will practice in every way justice along with wisdom, in order that we may be friends to the gods and to ourselves as well, both while we remain here on earth and when we receive the rewards of virtue, like the victors in the games going round collecting their prizes, and that both here and in the 1,000-year journey, which I have told you of, all may be well with us. And that's it. That's right. How it ends. So he talks about the ultimate accounting of the soul and the prizes one gains, and how one is able to gain a closer proximity to the metaphysical, to the divine, right, through wisdom and justice, through right reasoning and right living. And that his city, which he, like I say, he likens to the human soul, that it is through his ideals, through the rule of the best, and living according to those ideals, that one is able to gain the closest proximity to the immaterial, to the divine. So that is his ultimate point. That's where it ends. And that was Plato's Republic. Yeah. That's how it all ends. That's it, that's all. So yeah. So yeah, I must say, that it's been an interesting read again. Like I mentioned before, I said, like the first time that I had to, read this was back in, if I remember correctly, 1992. And so, like I said, when I had to read it for the class, it was just about getting the information and the tests and stuff like that. I remember a lot. It's not that I didn't remember, but and reading it now, you know, especially the climate of our world and what's going on. So much of what we think we should be doing, because things are not proper, and things are out of order. This is it's chaos. You have people out here who are out here marrying goalposts and toys, and it's just, the world is just a chaotic mess, and so we need order.
And even in Plato's time, that's what he is trying to do. He's trying to achieve at least, some type of order, and he's trying to order the city state in a particular way so that it can, always produce a particular kind of people, not understanding again that they're people. And so here we are, having these same type of issues, and we have these same type of dilemmas, and we're still not really answering the call to for people, basically.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are.
To review here, to conclude, Plato's Republic isn't really about a perfect society, in so much as it's about a perfect person. And it's about the need, definitively proving the need
right,
for justice and wisdom at every level, at every aspect of life. That is the overall point that Plato was trying to make. And that overall point is one that I can understand and is one that I can agree with. But the way Plato talks about achieving those points on both the macro and the micro levels, I feel are so damaging,
right,
and counterproductive to achieving his goals. I think that if you were to build Plato's Republic, and if you were to try to live the way Plato says that you ought to live, that it will take you further away from those goals, that you're trying to attain than just living normally.
Right. Right.
I think that, like I said, Plato has a fundamental misunderstanding of what a person is and what society is and how these things are meant to relate to each other. The city is meant to, like we've said many times, embolden the human spirit, give it ease, and allow for it to best be itself, not to crush and control the human condition. There isn't, the problem here isn't a lack of rulership. It's not, the problem here isn't the laws aren't there. The problem is that you have a society that is prioritizing profit over all things. You may try to prioritize the kinds of profit that it shouldn't be the profit of the material world, but the profit of the immaterial, divine metaphysical world that we should be chasing. But the problem is profit in and of itself.
That's right.
Your ideas are impossible. And not are they impossible, but they should be impossible. Not only is the philosopher king impossible, but the philosopher king should be impossible. There is no one person, no one group that should be able to define reality and the goals of life for anyone else. There is no law that should be able to regulate human existence. These things often come after the point, after the changes are made. If the only thing that is keeping you from killing each other is that murder is illegal, then you have not made any progress.
That's right. You have a whole other set of issues. That's right.
You haven't made any progress.
That's right.
As in, murder is illegal, has always been illegal, as far as I know. But yet people are still murdered. Right? So the thing that you're trying to contend with is you're not trying to contend with the law. I'm not saying that you shouldn't contend with laws, that you shouldn't try to create laws and all these things. But you have to understand that humanity is beyond laws and constitutions and cities. That the city has to meet humanity.
Right.
Humanity does not have to meet its cities. The cities were created for us, to help us. We should not have to curtail anything about what it means to be a human being to live in a city.
Right.
That is counterintuitive. Right. That's not the point.
Right.
Human beings prioritize. If we say that human beings are good, then our city should allow us to be good. It should not be this, this we have to win the war to be good. So we have to be best able to win the war.
Right.
We have to best be able to chase the profits of the soul. We have to best be able to do these things. It isn't about that. Like we said, living is about doing your best, but not being the best. There's a fundamental misunderstanding here that sometimes you find yourself in situations where all you have are bad choices, but you still have to choose. You just have to do what's best in that moment. And all these things that we've said many a times before that Plato seems to understand, but he actually doesn't. Like he uses the word best. But they're coming from two different places.
Yes,
when we
that's
say,
obvious, right?
When we say best,
right,
we're talking about the compromise of life. And we say that compromise should not be one that is instilled in law, but understood by human beings on our level. It's not society's place to tell us to compromise. It should be human beings taking that compromise in and of itself. Like I said, you can't impose order. You can only achieve it. You can't create peace. You can only reach it.
Right. And like I said, we know this, but it's just a matter of, I'll say, catching up to the knowledge. We know that you cannot impose, the kind of order that you want to impose and not have people respond in another way to that imposition. It just doesn't.
Because it doesn't matter how great your order is, you're still imposing it. You're taking a shortcut. You're not doing the actual work of achieving those goals. So, like you said, I can understand what Plato wants to do. I can understand what Plato is trying to do. He makes the mistake that all revolutionaries, all nation builders make. The problem is not your city. Right? Your city is a reflection of your people. The problem is the things that we as people prioritize in life. The problem is that for a very long time, we have allowed our society to be governed by and led by people who are only looking for their own profit, for their own best, which they prioritize over everyone and everything else. And these people are your captains of industry, are the ones who have the resources who wage the wars. The rest of us are living in that society.
That's right.
Are living in a society that prioritizes the best for one particular group. For the group of people who are best able to, I don't know, what would you say? For a group of people who are best able to benefit from these things. And that's always been the case. The problem isn't that your kingdoms are failing, is that you have kingdoms. There is no, like we said, there's no difference between kings and tyrants because both of them have to impose their will on their citizenship and on those people that they are coming into contact with. Your worldview cannot exist outside of that biome. So anytime anything it does exist outside of it, it must be controlled, it must be conquered, it must be brought into the fold. It crushes everything.
It must be made to heal.
It has to. It has to.
Yeah, and the idea of, calling something, well, an empire versus calling it a tribe. I said, but the results
are the same.
Are the same.
It's stifling.
Right.
It stifles the human spirit. Right. And it often leads us to this question of what's wrong. Mm-hmm. Like I said, Plato is writing about this. He's writing about the wrongs of society in 400 BC or whatever. 32 BC, whatever. Whenever he wrote this, right. Before Christ. Right. He's like, there's something wrong here. Uh-huh. He's right, there is something wrong. But the way you go about fixing it, is not through imposing your worldview. Right. It's not about prioritizing a particular person or a particular group over another. That's the chaos that you have now. And this imposition it always comes from the top down. Mm-hmm. It's those at the top who want to maintain a particular type of order, a particular type of class. Like I said, you can't impose these things. Right. The actual work here is not grandiose. Mm-hmm. It's not winning the war. It's not an adventure. Life is an adventure. Mm-hmm. This is real life. Life is an experience. Mm-hmm. The way you reach people is not through laws. Mm-hmm. It's not through, at the other end of your sword or your gun or whatever weapon you try to impose. Mm-hmm. It's not a debate here. It's a discussion. You talk. Mm-hmm. You argue your point as best as you possibly can. Mm-hmm. You try, to get people, to see. Mm-hmm. And you live according to your own beliefs. Mm-hmm. That's how this changes. Right. Because we all know that something's wrong here. There's something's missing. Mm-hmm. Something we somebody forgot to carry one. Right. Because our results that's right. are not what they need to be. Like something's messed up here. That's right. So that's the basis we're working from. Mm-hmm. The idea of imposing your rightness is how we got here. Everybody thinks they're right. Yeah. Everybody thinks if we just do this and we go about it this way, it's going to go. No, it's not about imposing. It's about, how could I say this? Allowing. Allowing. I was going to say provoking. Uh-huh. You don't impose change, but you try to provoke it. Mm-hmm. And you don't, force people to walk your way. Mm-hmm. You meet them where they are. Right. And you allow them to meet particular goals. That's right. Meet their needs, right. And their needs the way that it needs to be met for them where they are. Mm-hmm. There's no universal answer here. Right. There shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. We're people. We're myriad. Mm-hmm. Let's say as long as you're working from a basis, right. Like we've talked about many times before, as long as you're working from a basis of self-respect, of respect, of camaraderie and understanding, as long as you're working from that basis, those things that are inexorably linked to our ideas of humanity as a whole, as long as we are working from that basis, and we are, then everything else is just, what are you going to do? Right. That's it. We know. You're actually able to deal with conflicts. Yeah. In that way versus imposing, well, I won, so this is it, and that's all. Yeah, like you said, we know what peace looks like. We know what it's supposed to feel like. Mm-hmm. We know what order looks like. Mm-hmm. We know what respect is. We know what we want. Mm-hmm. We know these things. Right. We've known them for a very long time. All there is now is understanding that we can't force people to live the way that we say they ought to be living. That's right. Because, there is no ought to be. Mm-hmm. There's just life. And in its multitudinous, beneficent forms. Mm-hmm. All we can do is meet the needs of the moment as they present themselves. Right. In a way that is conducive to the human spirit and does not crush it. That's the point here. Mm-hmm. That's the overall point, and that's what I feel Socrates or Plato, Plato's Republic, right. Plato's idea as a whole are lacking. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to control the human spirit. You're not trying to build peace. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to impose order. These things have been done. They've already been done.
That's right.
If they already exist in the metaphysical, then all
Right.
that is for you to reach it, not reflect it.
Right.
Reach it. So yes, that's Plato's Republic.
Right.
We're going to be taking a break.
Yes.
Enjoy your summer. We will.
Yes.
And if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments. And thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.